Shadows, the horror movie Heroes by Clouds. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 38, Car Chase. Muriel almost wished he'd been surprised when a veritable arsenal went off as soon as he walked in the open door. "You were right, Amajiki," he called behind him. "It was a trap." "I hate being right." Amajiki skulked into the room. The guns tried to go off again, but the empty cartridges just clicked uselessly. Mario cupped his hands around his mouth. "All right, villain. We know you're in here. Come on out." Predictably, there was no response. Mario wouldn't have answered either, but it was worth a try. He looked at Amajiki. "Do you think they already left for the third location?" Amajiki shrugged. "It's safer to clear the area. I'm scared they'll shoot us in the back as we leave if we don't." Mario nodded. "Sounds about right. You take the right, I'll take the left." Amajiki nodded, and they began their search. "Hey, Hitoshi?" Izuku's voice sounded more nervous than usual. "Mario's not going to be arriving at your location." "What? Why?" "Because he's at mine." Hitoshi swallowed. The traps they'd set up were pretty specific to the heroes that Izuku predicted would show up. Not that it would be impossible for Hitoshi to beat Tamaki, especially if he'd eaten the emetic that Izuku had planted. But he was currently more concerned about Izuku fighting Mirio. He was a formidable fighter, even without his quirk. With it? Well, there were reasons why they decided to use brainwashing as their main strategy. Izuku swore, and Hitoshi turned all his attention back to the conversation at hand. "What happened?" "They didn't split up," Izuku reported. "Amajiki's here too, and they're starting to clear the area. I can try to get out, but they'll see me if I do." Hitoshi's blood froze, and he dashed out of his hiding place, scaring a few civilians who'd been passing by on the street. He ignored their screams and used a rock to break the window on the car objective. This one did happen to be the real objective. The other two were decoys that Izuku had created fake tags for to lure the heroes, but that was the furthest thing from Hitoshi's mind as he hot-wired the car, thankful for the internet and for all the work they'd put in preparing. Izuku was in trouble, and Hitoshi needed to save him. Izuku was running out of hiding places. He was looking forward to learning how to canvas areas so thoroughly in the hero course if they made it in. But for now, it was a pain. He should have made a little backup plan. But after everything went so well with the bombing, well, live and learn. Assuming he lived, of course. He'd managed to get to the last available hiding spot, but it had barely bought him a few minutes. Both Mirio and Amajiki were getting close now. They'd find him in 5, 4, 3, 2. Both heroes froze when the lights suddenly flickered. What was the lights flickered again? Do the shadows have an electric quirk? One of their allies did. Mirio frowned, but he got eliminated already. Okay, so then why are the lights right on cue? The room went black. It didn't stay that way for long, though. There was a series of bright flashes and the sound of several somethings skittering across the floor, and suddenly the room was confusingly lit in flashing lights. Dozens of shadows of all shapes and sizes danced across the walls, and Izuku could barely make out Mirio and Amajiki frantically looking around the warehouse for the source of the chaos. Something grabbed his arm, and Izuku barely resisted the urge to yelp when he realized it was just Hitoshi. A half second later, they were running through the strobing warehouse toward the exit. "What are those things?" Izuku whispered. "Just flashlights with a strobe setting." Hitoshi whispered back. "I was hoping the light and shadows would be enough to cover our escape. It won't work for long, obviously, but..." There! Izuku and Hitoshi picked up the pace and ran out of the warehouse. There was no point shutting the door behind them. Mirio would just walk through it anyway. Instead, Hitoshi pulled a paint grenade from his pocket and pulled the ring. They didn't look back to see if it hit, but it still allowed them a few precious seconds to run to the minivan that Hitoshi had parked outside. Look out! Mirio went intangible as soon as he saw an unidentified object leave the purple shadow's hand. Sparing his last breath to warn Tamaki, even though he had to already have seen it, he held his intangibility for as long as he could, but eventually the burning in his lungs won out. The sight that met him when his vision returned was devastatingly familiar, except instead of Nejire, covered in red paint, this time it was Tamaki. He held out his token for Mirio to take. They got me, and the villains I captured earlier. I knew I should have left them at the agency. Mirio nodded numbly and took the token. He turned away as Tamaki sat down on the paint-covered ground to wait for the teachers. The seed of determination that Mirio had been nurturing inside of himself since Nejire's death bloomed into a raging inferno. He was through with underestimating these villains. He had no one left to lose. The minivan peeled off seconds before Mirio landed exactly where they'd been parked. It probably wasn't the best vehicle to be outrunning a hero in, especially since both Izuku and Hitoshi had just barely taught themselves to drive via video games as part of their self-imposed training for this exercise. Mirio's fast, Izuku panted, but he'll be tired from staying up all night. So if we gun it, then maybe... He trailed off and Hitoshi gripped the steering wheel a little harder. What? We have a problem. Another one? No, same one, just different. Remember the fake car objective we left in the warehouse? Yes. Izuku gulped and kept his eyes glued to the rear side mirror. Mirio stole it. Attention all civilians. Netsu's voice echoed over the speakers in the fake city, causing everyone to stop where they were. There is currently a car chase in progress. Please remain inside and off roadways for your own safety. Thank you. Torino held Recovery Girl back as she tried to jump into the screen. Wow, look at him go. Oh, I'm looking. Recovery Girl griped. I'm looking at them being reckless. That's for sure. If somebody ends up getting hurt, I'm going to give those boys a piece of my mind. You'll probably end up giving them a piece of your mind anyway, Torino pointed out. And besides, that's why Netsu gave them a warning. They already know those two boys have a few screws loose, so they're bound to stay out of the way. Hitoshi had never been so grateful to find deserted streets. The speeds they were careening through the city at were definitely unsafe. But with Mirio chasing them down in a truck, they didn't have many other options. Well, they could maybe turn themselves in, but they weren't about to give up now, not when they were so close. Izuku guided them through the tightest streets they could manage with no luck. Mirio's truck wasn't gaining on them, but it wasn't falling behind either. Suddenly, the truck sped up, putting out a last burst of speed before gliding through a stop. What's he doing? Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Trying to trick us into stopping? Something shot out of the ground so quickly that all they could see was a blur, and then there was a loud crash as something landed on the roof of the van. Hitoshi's window shattered inwards, and he could feel tiny bits of glass scrape his face before he was physically yanked out the broken window and up onto the roof. He struggled to keep his balance as the car swerved, but it helped that he was being held onto by Mirio. How had he caught up to them? He was supposed to be back in the stopped truck. Well, fancy meeting you here. Hitoshi forced his voice to sound cool and collected. Nice little trick, catching up to us like that. Mind telling me how you did it? He expected a not a chance or even just a screw you for his quirk to latch onto, but Mirio's ever-present smile just deepened into a grimace, and he punched Hitoshi in the stomach hard enough for him to double over. Okay, this wasn't great. How was he supposed to get this guy to talk? The van slowed to a stop and Izuku got out, but there wasn't much he could do. Any attack he launched would go right through Mirio and hit Hitoshi instead. Come on, Hitoshi tried again, his voice taking on a slight tinge of desperation. You don't really think you can beat us, do you? I mean, you may as well go join your friends. It was the wrong thing to say. Mirio's face twisted in rage. He wound back his arm, and Hitoshi barely had time to realize that he was going to have a gnarly black eye before everything went black. It took everything Mirio had not to beat those boys to a bloody pulp. He had to keep repeating that it wasn't real in his head over and over and over. The shadows hadn't really killed his friends. Tamaki and Nejire were safe with the teachers, and as soon as these villains were picked up, he'd be able to see them again. He just had to last one more day. He hadn't trusted himself to speak back when the purple shadow was trash-talking him before. He knew he'd probably just end up saying something he'd regret. He'd calmed down a little now. He was still angry, but it wasn't the red-hot rage he'd felt after Tamaki's death. At least now he had enough self-control to not grip the tied-up villains too tightly as he carried them into the agency. They had both woken up now, which was good, and probably could have walked in on their own if Mirio trusted them to do so, which he didn't. It would be hard to run away tied up as they were, but Mirio didn't put anything past them. Izuku could have been lying about being quirkless, and Mirio still didn't know hardly anything about the other shadow, so it was best not to take any chances. He threw one over each shoulder and made his way down to the holding cell. He put the boys inside the main holding cell, not bothering to untie them, and triple-checked to make sure the door locked behind them. So, I guess that's it, huh? The purple shadow sighed, beat at the last possible second by... Sorry, what was your name again? Lemillion. Mirio answered, remember it if you ever consider becoming real His voice trailed off as his mind became fuzzy, and he was vaguely aware of both villains grinning ear to ear. Unlock the cell door and untie us. To his rage, Mirio obeyed. The shadows rubbed their sore wrists and stretched as the ropes fell to the floor. Better late than never, huh, Hitoshi? Izuku mused. Hitoshi hummed in agreement. Still wish he'd shown up at the right location we thought he would. We'd already be home free. Well, we're almost there, Izuku shrugged. Ask him to give us some weapons. Hitoshi gave the order, and Mirio tried as hard as he could not to obey, but still moved to the emergency weapons closet in the corner of the room and handed them each a gun anyway. Izuku exhaled slowly. On 3? Hitoshi nodded. On 3. 1, 2. The paintballs hit Mirio's chest, and suddenly his mind was his own again. Hello, remaining villains and civilians. Nedzu didn't waste any time coming over the loudspeakers. There is no point in continuing the exercise now that all students have been eliminated. I now declare this year's exercise officially complete. End of chapter.